Welcome to the QBC podcast, where we explore new paradigms in health and science that have a meaningful impact on our day to day lives. I'm your host, Meredith Oak, a curious coach and mom. I started a journey to overcome chronic fatigue and found myself in a whole new quantum universe. I believe new research shouldn't stay locked away in an ivory tower, and that wisdom can be found in many places and understood by all of us. To keep in touch with this podcast, the QBC free community, our episode guide, and all the show notes, please visit qbcpod.com, qbcpod.com. Let's get together to create the future we all want to live in. One of the most fun things about doing this job, this podcasting job, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. My daughter had to she's filling out one of those like Mother's Day things. And I forget what the question was. It was something like, what is something your mother does that you think is weird or you don't understand or is kind of confusing to you? And my daughter just put her job. Anyway, one of the most interesting things about being where I am at this moment in time is seeing the evolution of people who are bringing new projects, new products, new programs into the world through this new paradigm that we are all participating in. If you're listening to this podcast, you're bought in. You're in the new paradigm. You are living in a world that 99.999% of people don't really realize exist. Even people who are, think they're on the cutting edge of science. I spent a lot of time trolling around, seeing what people think and what they believe, and even the people who are considered to be at the forefront of their expertise in any given area have no idea that you need physics to explain biology. Like they just don't know. So I consider this to be like a super fun vantage point and perspective. I do also find that there's a deeply spiritual element to engaging in this kind of information, because you really have to challenge yourself and we have to challenge ourselves, our preconceptions, our ability to operate in a world that doesn't understand where we're coming from, and being able to bridge that and still participate in society and have fun and have friends and not make new paradigm science our entire personality. But at the same time, go really deep into it and really explore what it means to believe and know and understand all of these things. All right. Okay. That's just sort of what was on my mind at this time, at this juncture. I am just so thrilled that you're all here and you're all interested in it. So back to what I was saying, which is one of the most fun things is seeing people do stuff, right? And this is the secret. I'm just going to tell you, you can just do stuff. You can just go do it. There is no gatekeeper to the universe. There's no gatekeeper to reality. If you feel called to have a career switch and become a coach, you can just do it. If you feel called to become an educator or write an article or write a book, I don't know, you can just do it. Just do it. All you need is a support, which I have in my coaching program, Expansion Circle. But you can cultivate your own support anywhere you want. Like that's really all that is required, I think, to go forward on a new path and just do stuff. So my guest today just did stuff. When I met her, she was a podcaster with her partner on a podcast called The Revolutionize. And today she is the owner of a red light therapy company. And so my guest today is Sarah Turner. And she has I forget, it's in her bio, multiple degrees in things, including neuroscience. She started her career at GlaxoSmithKline doing research for some of their pharmaceutical products. And she explains her experience there, the insights that she had, how she then left that industry to explore research in Parkinson's disease, which led her to start her red light company, which is specifically her device is specifically made to address the gut-brain axis It's really cool and really good. There's not really anything else like it on the market. So Sarah came in, she talked about all the things. She talked about like she gets really into the science. So for my science nerds, you'll love this. And also into just some very practical recommendations of how red light therapy works, what aspects of it are important, how to do it so that you get the most out of it, as well as some really interesting insights into early onset Parkinson's, which I'm sure most of you know people who have that. I certainly do, like multiple people. It seems to be much more prevalent. Just anecdotally, it feels more prevalent than it used to, and it's starting to affect people at younger and younger ages. So this is a really important topic. So enjoy my chat with Sarah Turner. And don't forget to visit bondcharge.com for other red light devices, as well as just like little night lights and things like that you can carry around, so you don't have to turn on the big bad overhead lights after dark. We just don't want to do that, do we? Enjoy. Oh, one last thing. This is a little bit different because this podcast was recorded with some of our QBC Pro members. So there are questions at the end from other people besides me. There are other people on the call. It was kind of a group effort, really fun. If you're interested in joining QBC Pro, which is like a really low cost way to become a little bit more immersed in this content beyond just podcasts, but it's, a month to month thing. We've just revamped it with the help of Nico Kennedy. She's done lots of work to revamp our content and make it available. So yeah, I was supposed to tell you that. We did this with QBC Pro people. If you want to join that, go to qbcpod.com. All right, have fun. Sarah Turner, welcome back to the QBC podcast. It's a pleasure to see you again. I'm excited to dive into neuroscience with you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to chat to you and be on your show.
Super fun. So for those of us who just joined us, we are doing this live with an audience. Members of the QBC Pro community are here listening to my interview with Sarah, and then they will all be invited to do a Q&A. So this is a slightly different format than usual. So Sarah, to start off, you've been on the podcast before, and we did kind of a deep dive into your background. So I really recommend people go listen to that episode. It was really good. But I would like to go over it again just a little bit. Your background in neuroscience, your training in red light therapy, your deep dive into Parkinson's research. How did it all happen? And how did you end up in this weird area of health instead of working for a pharmaceutical company?
Well, funny enough, I did start out at the pharmaceutical company. So my background is I was a scientific researcher at pharmaceutical companies for the first 10 years of my career. And I spent 6 years with GlaxoSmithKline, one of the biggest worldwide, but certainly the biggest in the UK. And I was looking at researching not actually drugs, but more drug delivery devices. So I was involved in asthma delivery. And more specifically, I was on a task force. If there's issues that came up, a task force was sent in to resolve the issue quickly. And one of the main issues that they were looking at some point was, why do these they had new asthma inhaler devices, why were they not working as they were expected? Because they knew the drug was good, but for some reason, when they put it out in these, they were like a spherical plastic inhaler, a bit of a change from their usual ones. And what we found very rapidly was it's because the plastic causes a static charge. And so if the artificial lung, because that's what we were testing, we don't test in humans in these labs, everything's tested, in a kind of a simulation. But if that wasn't grounded, because these plastic devices actually made a static charge, then you got a different deposition of the drug in the lung. And so I did a lot of experiments where I was grounded, where I was not grounded, where I wore like rubber welly boots, where I wore like special an outfit that had silver in it so that we knew I was grounded. But what I found was it makes a big difference whether actually you're grounded or not. not, where the drug will deposit in the lung. And to me, this was kind of a bit of a revelation because it was nothing to do with actually the inhaler or the drug delivery. It was purely the state of where you're delivering that drug, right? In that case, it was into we call them stacks, into the kind of simulation of a lung. But in reality, the implication is that if the person isn't grounded or hasn't touched the ground, the drug is going to deposit in a different place in the body. And so really the solution for the problem is just to make sure everybody is grounded before they start taking these drugs, because potentially you would need less drugs or maybe even no drug at all if that was kind of the problem with the lung function in the first place. So that's really why I left. But one of many reasons, but I think that was probably like the straw that broke the camel's back from why I left the pharmaceuticals, because really the solution is not necessarily then in the pharmaceutical. It's really in the environment of the person. And that's something that is so easy to modify. You know, something as simple as standing out on the ground for 10 minutes could have solved that solution of this strange drug deposition in the lung.
Isn't that incredible? And it's so interesting to me how, living as we all exist in the quantum field, you never know what thread is going to lead us to that next insight. So you were trying to figure out why the drug delivery system didn't work, and you ended up uncovering the science of grounding and how important it is to humans, which is a completely different paradigm than what the pharmaceutical company was operating in.
It's a completely different paradigm. And actually, with credit to Glaxo, they did actually start to initiate some very interesting studies into all kinds of like bipolar drug deposition in the lung, different kinds of plastics, different kinds of effects. I mean, ultimately, they're just looking for a plastic that doesn't cause the effects. You know, they're not ultimately looking for solutions for people to dissipate the effect in themselves, you know, which is really what is available to everybody. I mean, they are still a business, but it was a very interesting insight for me about how charge in the body specifically can have a very dramatic effect. And, you know, we were talking about inhaled products, but you can apply that to anything that's inhaled. You know, we're inhaling fine particles and things in our environments all the time. You know, whether that's for the good or for the bad, the way that our bodies respond to our environment very much depends on the charge in our bodies. So, you know, in order to maximize the efficacy of all the systems in the body, something very simple like grounding, and kind of we know this now, there's been a lot of books written about earthing and grounding, but this is a very real demonstration of that. So, yes, that was very interesting for me. And then I left the pharmaceutical industry and I actually pursued nutritional medicine, because for me, that was the next step. It's like, okay, how can we best prepare the body? We can do grounding, but maybe we can also change ourselves from the inside with nutrition. But actually that didn't go far enough, because for a lot of times, you know, your mind state is so intrinsically linked that you can change your nutrition and not have an effect. So I went on to study clinical neuroscience. And that was really where I started to learn more about the brain and brain function, and then start to look at ways to modify brain function. You know, my focus changed from that point. I moved to the States. I got involved in the whole biohacking movement. I did Jack Kruse cruise. I studied various people. I went and interviewed Mei Wan Ho. So that was the point, really, I suppose about 15 years ago when I moved to the States, that I got mostly involved in looking very seriously at the brain and brain function and ways that we could modify that with an alternative medicine slant.
Right. And what were some of the insights that you had that were different from traditional neuroscience?
Yes, well, of course, as you know, I think probably your group probably knows this very well, but most traditional courses in biology and neuroscience are not teaching biophysics. You know, so at this point, I had 3 science degrees because I had already got a biology science degree. I went on and got my nutritional medicine degree, and then I had a clinical neuroscience master's degree. At no point did anybody ever mention how biology interacts with light, how potentially water changes its structure when you have an interaction with light. Nobody was really talking a lot even about circadian biology. So I was still very much taught the kind of lock and key, kind of more biochemical view of the brain. Even with all of that education, So it wasn't really until I really started getting into the work of, like, let's say, Dr. May Wan Ho, Dr. Jack Kruse, all of the people who went then, and all of the people who went before, because obviously there was lots of people talking about line, for example, a long time before then. But they were the ones who really got me to understand it in a scientific way. So yes, it's a total turnaround from any of my academic training. I can just say from my academic training, at least now I have the background to understand how the brain works, that I can apply these new learnings, because really they were all new learnings. All of the quantum biology piece was new learnings for sure.
Right. And I'm so interested in that because I think it's actually a really, really good combination to have a very strong foundation in the traditional model. So that way, when you layer on the biophysics piece, the quantum piece, you you can fill in the missing pieces, of which there are many, but you can also speak to people who are still living and working out of the old paradigm and be a bridge. The flip side of that is that, and this goes for so many people in this community, you're, I don't want to say out on your own, right? But you're charting a new path. Like we're all sort of contributing to the creation of an alternative to what is currently the mainstream structure. So what did that look like for you? How did you find your way? How did you find your people? How did you support yourself?
Well, actually, when I came to the States, I came with a company. I was looking at some very way out there science, focusing on consciousness interface devices.
Love it. What's that about?
Very, very interesting, because there was some research that was carried out at Stanford, actually, where they were looking at the ability to influence seemingly random events with the power of the mind. So, the experiments, the original experiments, they called the pair. It was actually Princeton, not Stanford. The original experiments were called the pair studies, where they were using like a wall with different color ping pong balls and looking to see whether, even though it should be a random distribution, could you maybe focus on one color, and therefore somehow your own focused intention was influencing the result. And other people have done interesting experiments. William Tiller also did some interesting experiments looking at whether you could potentially affect the pH of a liquid. All kinds of very interesting things can you influence. I know that there are now different devices which have different random colors. Can you predict the next color that comes from in effect, it's like a random event generator or pseudo random event generator that's inside some kind of technology that mainly is what people use nowadays rather than these kind of big like ping pong balls on a wall. But it's the same concept. And it was a very interesting time, because there are a lot of people looking at this. It seems quite wacky and woo-woo, but actually when you meet the people who are doing the research, they're not at all. They're actually very serious, scientifically minded people. It's just, our measuring mechanisms, we don't have a good way for kind of measuring what that could be. And I think it comes down to either the science that we're using to measure is wrong, which is, that could be the case, or, we're looking at a different kind of effect, maybe some kind of strange effect where, there's something going on with the observation. But it was a difficult place to be for a long time, because like you say, there's so much resistance. And so, you're kind of labeled as fringe at best and kind of wacky woo-woo at worst. So you kind of have to take that on the chin. And actually, as I started to move through that process and really kind of get an understanding of it, I got introduced to the concept of structured water by interviewing Professor Jerry Pollock, who of course wrote the book Fourth Phase Water. And this is something that I could really get into, because although it's kind of still on the fringe, if you think about, people talking about ordered water, particularly in the brain, but it is something where you can actually measure the effect. And photobiomodulation has a long history of research, and it works, and it was through doing that and looking at structured water and then applying it to the brain, I got involved on some, like, as you mentioned before, Parkinson's trials. I could see a real tangible, measurable effect. So I made the jump to that, because although I still love that kind of woo-woo world, it's a difficult place to kind of base yourself permanently, because we're not using the right science to record those observations. But photobiomodulation straddles both worlds because we can go into the whole esoteric side of light science, which is fascinating, but we can also get very real, tangible clinical effects that we can use right now to kind of provide evidence and to make this mainstream. So really that's why I'm kind of in my happy spot right now, in between this kind of really exciting esoteric and fringe world of light therapy, but also in a very firm, hard scientific world of photobiomodulation where we can actually show clinical data.
I love this so much because yes, I get that question a lot, or that, that comes up a lot, and people are like, well, is this just like some biohacking thing? And no, I'm just gonna, like, how many minutes in front of the red light for this or that or whatever. Like, or is this more of a spiritual, we, open our consciousness to a new level? And it's like, well, it's both. What door are you coming in? So I love that you're bridging that. And I do see light as the starting point to go in any direction that you want to go, light incorporated with the structured water. So you started in pharmaceuticals, then you moved into consciousness, and now you're in photobiomodulation. So yes, this crowd is obviously very on the call here today is obviously very familiar with photobiomodulation, but for those who are tuning into this podcast who maybe have heard of red light therapy, they know a little bit about it. Could you give your description of what it is and why it's so important?
Yeah. I mean, we can kind of go very granular or we can go very surface level with photobiomodulation. I mean, it is just a long, fancy word for light therapy, right? Photo being light, modifying something, modifying biology with light really is the definition. And it's a new definition because previously a lot of the devices that we use were laser. So they had to change the definition from cold level laser therapy or low level laser therapy to something more inclusive because people now use different light sources. So photobiomodulation was the term for better or for worse. It's a bit of a mouthful, but to me, it's just the concept of using light to change our biology. And, very simplistically, the sun is our major power source. And it's something that for literally thousands and thousands of years, it's something that, biology has evolved alongside the sun. And that's really why biology is here at all, is because of the sun. So we respond in a myriad of ways to the different wavelengths of light from the sun. And so red light therapy is taking a portion of the sun's wavelengths of light, and it's the portion that's usually found at sunrise and sunset because of the angle of the sun at the sky at that point. We get this longer wave light. Because if we think about light as a spectrum going from shortwave to long wave, red light is at the longer wave of the visible range and a little bit further on. So we're talking about longer wave visible light and slightly longer than that. And this is like I say, sunrise and sunset. This light will penetrate our bodies because actually our bodies are very transparent to near infrared light. And then we have a whole cascade of biological effects. Now, probably we're just at the start of working out exactly how this works with our biology. Because if we discussed before, this is a new science. People, have not really published a lot on the mechanisms of light therapy because I think, we haven't historically applied the physics angle to biology. But we do know it's received by the mitochondria, which is where our body makes energy. We do know that it increases ATP. We do know that it affects reactive oxygen species. We know there's a transient release of nitric oxide. So those small things mean that we have energy and blood flow. And, for a lot of people, that may be enough. I think probably what's going on is far more complex and intricate than that, because we have synaptogenesis, we have neurogenesis. There are lots of different light receivers, not just the mitochondria. I mean, I came into it via water. So, one of the things I've always got running is how are we actually changing the structure of water in our bodies and what are those implications? Huge and many. But we have other, anything with an aromatic ring is going to oscillate to a certain extent to certain wavelengths of light and specifically red light too. So our bodies are really oscillating, vibrating with these different wavelengths of light. We live indoor lifestyles now. There's not many people who are outside all day and all night, kind of getting those wavelengths of light. So we're very deficient. We're very deficient as a species in long wave red light. If you start to put those back, it's like any deficiency. As soon as you start to put those wavelengths back, the body starts to respond, and sometimes in very amazing ways, because your body's been deficient in something. You give it back, the body starts working. So I think from a very simplistic point of view, it's as simple as that. I see it almost like a vitamin deficiency or any other deficiency. As soon as you put that back, the body will then start working, because you now have the tools that the body needs to function.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think it's such a good way to present it and to help people to think about it. When I sort of am out in the world, and, this winter I've talked to so many people who are like, oh, I had the flu and it's been 3 weeks and I still don't feel better. And I'm like, you should really go get an infrared sauna, right? There's a little place near where I live where you can just pay like $30 for half an hour and sit in there. And they're like, what? And it's because like we lack the language, we lack the paradigm to think about light. And so to talk about it I'm like, it's like food, the difference between processed food and real food. Same goes for light. But it's the way our lives are structured. It's so hard for many of us to get what we need from the sun because we're just not outside enough. So now I want to get into the brain a little bit, because there are a lot of red light therapy devices on the market. A lot of quality products that will make a difference in your life, but most of them are not specific to the brain. And with your background in neuroscience, and then the new paradigm, you've decided to focus on the brain. So tell us from a biophysics point of view, from the quantum biologic perspective, how you see the brain working and why it needs red light.
Yeah, I think we have kind of lost sight of ourselves a little bit as light beings, of really running on light as a major energy source. It's something alien. It's not something that we've been made aware of. And maybe it's kind of even less obvious to us now that we do lead these indoor lives. And maybe we're not so conscious of, the cycles of light, the cycles of the sun. A lot of that has been taken away from us. We don't do our own farming. We're really very much kind of removed from this understanding of how we respond to light. And from a point of view of how the brain is working, like I say, the brain is covered in potential light receivers. So the mitochondria, the water in our brains, the flavins in our brains, the opsins in our brains. So we're covered in light receivers. And so from my point of view, it's how can we optimize getting this kind of beneficial light onto the brain in a way that's going to have a therapeutic effect. So from my research, I think we know that we get light onto the brain. We do know that the skull is a barrier because, you've got quite a lot of bone. The brain is contained in the skull. And although it's not dark in there, we are receiving and emitting light from our brains. We do have to make sure that the light goes in. And with light, the angle is very important, because if you have something that's kind of square to you and the angle is not right, the light is very bouncy. Light is just going to bounce off different surfaces. So, if you see light coming off if you see yourself shining up red when you're doing the light therapy, a lot of that is light that's coming off you. It's not actually going in. So in order for light to actually get onto the surface of the brain, we know that we have to have something that fits flush to the head and is contoured in the right way, that the angle is just right. So there are a lot of light therapy devices for the brain, and all of them are either like a helmet or something that actually pushes up close to the head. And the reason for that is you really do have to get the right angle. With regards to the wavelength, you also need to have near infrared, because red light is surface level. So red light is going to get the blood, and it's going to get the skin, and it's going to do good work. But in order to get onto the surface of the brain, you need near infrared. So that's the longer wave I was talking about. So from my point of view, I'm interested in structured water. Water absorbs above 900 nanometers. So that's relatively a longer wavelength of light than most devices use, because most devices don't want the light to be absorbed by the water. They want it on the mitochondria. But for my device, I wanted to have these longer wavelengths too, because I want to target water. So you need to have a device that is at least 850 nanometers. Mine also does 940 and 1070 because I'm targeting all kinds of different light receivers in the brain. But the main thing is to have something that's flush. And then the other thing is hair. You know, we all have different kinds of hair. And although I'm not saying that hair is going to be directly a barrier, it will change the absorption. You know, the darker your hair, the more light it will absorb. The thicker your hair, the more it will kind of reflect and bounce the light. So from my point of view, I wanted to give a consistent dose because I'm making a home use device, you know, for many people to use. So in order for me to be sure that I'm giving everyone the same dose, my device just goes through the front part of the forehead. And also you're there on the frontal cortex. You know, this is a very important part of the brain, is decision making. And a lot of neural projections end here in the prefrontal cortex. So if we're thinking about how light's working in a brain, and again, this is where we have to go a little bit, we have to be a little imaginative because we really don't have a lot of data on why something like Parkinson's, it's really deep in the brain, right? And you're shining light onto the surface. Why is that responding so well? Maybe it's because you have a global effect of water. Maybe neurons are acting as waveguides. Maybe there's effect of microtubules. Something is going on, but whatever it is, it does seem that this part of the brain responds very well, even if you've got an issue with something that's deeper in the brain. So from my point of view, this is a great target. The prefrontal cortex, there's no hair, there's no barrier. You can actually get a reasonable amount of light onto the surface of the brain. It's still not easy. You're still getting a fraction of the light. And that's why I also use a body panel, because the effect of light is systemic. So if you can shine light into another part of the body, you're also going to have an effect on the brain. You know, if you're shining light onto the blood and the mitochondria are picking it up, you know, that's still going to end up in your brain. We're a huge interconnected system. You know, you can't.
Right.
So treating the body holistically was also another one of my reasonings for doing a dual device system where you could target different parts of the body and still have a brain effect.
Right. Because to use Mei Wenho's words, if we're a liquid crystal, then yes, everything is traveling at the speed of light or faster all through our body. So you have the gut, which is communicating with the brain, so light on the prefrontal cortex and light on the gut. And I wanted to talk a little bit about these neurodegenerative diseases. So Parkinson's, I feel like when I think about the generation above me, my parents' generation, the parents of my friends, cancer and Parkinson's, it's like, it seems to me that almost every family, someone has one of those two. So talk to me about what Parkinson's is. I know that you were involved in some studies using red light therapy on people with Parkinson's and the big lab, using big lab machines. So you've now developed a home use device. What is going on? How is Parkinson's and early onset Alzheimer's related to light? I know there's a lot of research out showing that disrupted circadian rhythms, having light in the bedroom while you're sleeping has been linked to these, I think more than linked. I think there's probably a causal mechanism that's been shown by now, but so much of the lead up to these diseases has been linked to light. What is going on, and how does adding in photobiomodulation help to work with these diseases?
So Parkinson's, you know, people may know that Parkinson's is a degeneration of the substantia nigra. It's neurons in a certain part of the brain, fairly deep in the brain, and you have degeneration of the neurons there. And even the word substantia nigra, it's interesting because it implies black, doesn't it? Nigra, you know, it's a word for black. And we know that if there's a dark matter in the body, you know, that we're probably thinking about melanin. And you know, that's why you have these different you have different kinds of molecules that are doing different things in the brain. It's very interesting that Parkinson's seems to be this disease which is caused by this particular dark neurons being degenerated. And we kind of know from a quantum biology point of view how important things like melanins are from a conduction point of view, from an electrically conductive view in the brain. Now, that's obviously not the orthodox scientific take on it, but if you kind of go back to thinking about the body as being electric and it's just really about redox potential and how electrons are moving in our brain and how light is penetrating the brain, I think it puts a very different slant on Parkinson's and why that would respond so quickly to light therapy. You have a lack of this pigment in the brain, which is making the brain more conductive. And then you start to shine light therapy on, which is in essence kind of charging up the brain in a very real way, like adding electrons to the brain. And then you start to see these beneficial effects. But, from an orthodox point of view, there is a degeneration of these neurons, cause unknown in orthodox science. But, of course, we're leading lifestyles where you have got things which are going to reduce your redox. People aren't grounding outside. People are watching blue screens. We're surrounded by different Wi-Fis. There's a lot of things happening in our environment which could potentially lower the charge or the redox potential we have in our bodies, which may in turn lead to degenerative diseases. And there are various genes and things which are linked to having certain weaknesses in certain body systems. So, that Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these neurodegeneration are also linked to certain genetic predispositions. So I think really it's just a combination of genetic and potentially epigenetic predispositions combined with lifestyle that puts you in a position where you are not able, for whatever reason, to charge your body and your brain. So that's why, if you start to think of the body more from our point, very simple battery point of view, it's just a depleted battery is the issue. And what you're doing with light is you're just charging the battery. I mean, I think it really is as simple as that. Obviously, if you really start to look at the biochemistry, lots of interesting things are going on. And Parkinson's is an interesting one because it's to gut health too. I think it's mainly recognized now that Parkinson starts in the gut because we have a lot of nervous tissue in the gut. We have the microbiome that lives in the gut. We have the vagus connection there. Again, this is hugely important from a point of view of that systemic effect of what's going on. If you have leaky gut and you have inflammation caused by metabolites going into your blood, then you have neuroinflammation too. Everything is systemic. Nothing is contained in its own compartment. So all kinds of things cause this leaky gut. Again, maybe bad food, maybe pesticides, maybe pollution, bad habits, bad relationships. If you're constantly stressed, you're potentially changing the chemicals in your gut and causing leaky gut. So everything is connected. I think, very simple, eat well, sleep well, have good relationships. That's the kind of thing we need to do. If we've got ourselves in a position where we've already got the genetic predisposition combined with a poor environment, that's really what causes any kind of, not only neurodegeneration, but probably any kind of chronic disease. How it manifests is probably just a bit of a mixture of, the cards you were dealt with initially.
Right. So it's interesting you say that. I was involved in an exchange on Twitter recently, and someone was saying we need to stop calling it mental health and physical health. And someone was like, "What should we call it?" And the guy was like, "Health." How about just health? It's everything. So I'm going to open it up to questions from. We have a lot of curious cats on the call today. Who has a question for Sarah? This is being recorded. So raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump right in. As I was saying, these are our this is our practitioner community who's on here today. Who wants to go first? Lynn. Lynn, just unmute yourself and ask your question. You can't. Okay. Okay, so this is from Lynn. Lynn wants to know about red light protocols specifically for Parkinson's.
Yeah, so at the moment, I do have a small cohort of young onset Parkinson's, actually. And that's just because it's just so happened that that's the community that of people that have come for some, you know how it is. Somebody gets a result from an illness and then they recommend to friends, and then you have a little community. And what they're finding mainly is that I have a program in my headband that also oscillates at 40 hertz, because we know that as well as shining light onto the brain to have an effect, you can also pulse that light at certain frequencies. The brain is pulsing at different frequencies all the time in hugely complex ways. But the hertz frequency, or number of times of oscillations a second, is the one that we usually measure when we're doing something like QEEG, which is an electroencephalogram. And 40 times a second seems to be a sweet spot for kind of enabling the brain to entrain to a frequency where you're more alert and attentive. So the protocol that we currently have for managing Parkinson's symptoms, and I want to be very clear that I'm not talking about curing, preventing, treating, or diagnosing disease. I'm talking about symptom management. A 40 hertz pulsing frequency with light on a headband, also utilizing a body pad, seems to be having the best result. And it's just 10 minutes a day on my device, which is about 50 milliwatts per second. If you're using a different product, maybe just kind of titrate up or down depending on the power. But I would say with that, it's fairly low power, actually. It's a fairly low power device. Oh, and Lynn's also asking, what do I think about V-Light? I think they're awesome. I think they're a brilliant company that's doing some great results. Great research, should I say. Dr. Lou Lim, I've seen him talk many times, and he's always at the frontier of things. So yeah, I think it's a good product.
And what's the difference? V-Light, that's the one that goes up your nose?
V-Light
Or am I thinking of something else?
V-Light, Vi-Light. They have one that goes up the nose, and then it's kind of like different little pods they have, and they're specifically targeting the default mode network. So theirs goes on the default mode network here, which is a bit awkward if you've got hair, but I think they must have worked a way to kind of push it in there. And then they have an intranasal, and their idea is you're getting light onto the kind of the olfactory bulb at the back. But I think their devices, they sell different ones. So they have an alpha and a gamma. So one is doing pulsing at 10 times a second, one's pulsing at 40, but I don't think it's in the same device unless I'm wrong. They might have come out with a combination device. But again, it's their kind of way of adjusting, of kind of targeting systemic, is that they use the nose. I use the gut because I'm interested very much in gut health. And I think if you can solve your gut health, a lot of the times the brain issues go away on their own. So I'm very much into using the gut. They use the nose. They use intranasal.
Fantastic. And Michelle has a question before we hear from Michelle. So you talked about doing case studies and collecting your research. You talked about some of the other companies that are doing the same thing. Is this body of research, who's going to look at it? Do you foresee a future where in the United States, perhaps the FDA will recognize these devices? Like what's the ideal pathway with this research?
So at the moment, we're still in a paradigm where in order to get medical device approval, you have to go through the FDA. I have to say, I think that is crumbling. That kind of institution is crumbling, and especially with the kind of the new political environment that you have here in the States, it seems things are changing. However, at the moment, to get a medical device approval, yes, you need to go through the FDA. And some companies are getting talked about V-Light. That's one example. They're looking to get a medical device approval for long COVID. And I think they've already submitted the data for that. So if they get that, then that's going to be great, because it means that then is a recognized disease state that light therapy is used for. And then that hopefully opens the doors for everybody else who wants to get a medical device approval. I know there are other companies looking at autistic spectrum disorder. I have some colleagues that are working on mild cognitive decline. So that is kind of the ultimate goal. I'm at the stage where I'm collecting data on young onset Parkinson's and motor neurons disease, which you call ALS here in the States. And I'm just doing documented case studies under the guided supervision of Professor Paul Chazot at Durham. but I'm a long way off from being able to submit that for medical device approval. But at the moment, I think there's enough market and a kind of option for people to be in the wellness market still. We can't talk about curing Parkinson's, but we can talk about helping people manage their symptoms and maybe going from a baseline of where they're at to better. And I think for now, maybe that is a place where we need to be, because like I say, I think things are changing and people are starting to recognize more alternative ways of looking at science and alternative ways of validating these technologies. I already know, people are starting to look at different research groups based in the Bahamas or maybe in Europe, where we're kind of having the same level of scrutiny on the data, but maybe not so much the bureaucracy, red tape, and outside interests that influence some of these big bodies like the FDA.
Yes, I agree. I think we're heading into a new era. I'm so excited to see what happens. And yes, that would be ideal. Keep the rigor, lose the bureaucracy.
Yes.
That should be our mantra. All right, Michelle, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I've got a couple of questions. The first one was just, I'm just curious on sort of what measurements and outcomes you're looking at other than symptoms. Are you using QEEG or any other, methodologies just to see the effect of your red light?
So I have a very small amount of people where I'm doing QEEG because it's quite expensive, and really I'm only doing that where I've got access to the university. So I have a couple of case studies going on at Durham where I have access to QEEG. Some of the people that I'm working with, because I've been in biohacking, have things like aura rings. And although, it's still not recognized as proper clinical data, it is valid data to look at taking someone from where they're at to like increased heart rate variability or deep sleep scores or things like that. So I do use metrics, not just aura. I have a platform that allows me to bring in anything anyone's got, whether that's Apple, Garmin, Fitbit, whatever they're using. So I use those kinds of metrics. I also use very basic questionnaires, because a lot of the people who are at the moment buying my product are people maybe a slightly older demographic who are quite happy with self-assessment questionnaires. So I have one called MyMop, Measure Yourself Outcome Questionnaire. And that is very simple. It's just, what is your main symptom on a scale of 1 to 6? What does it prevent you doing on a scale of 1 to 6? What is your general wellness? And then you just repeat that every month. And I find that hugely helpful for a lot of people, because when you start getting ill, start getting better. If you've been ill, you don't want to remember being ill. So for a lot of people, it's good to say, okay, well, when you first came, you said that your brain fog was at a 6 maximum. You're now saying it's at a 1. Oh yeah, I forgot. I used to be like that. So for me, when I'm just starting out, this is not clinical data that's going to be accepted by the FDA, but in order to kind of get something like a MyMop form is a tool, it is a registered tool. I could use it if I wanted to publish the data. So I'm not using anything that's wildly subjective, but at the same time, I'm very simple. I'm trying to make things as easy as possible for people.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. The other question I had was whether you had any experience combining your devices with methylene blue, because I've seen some research around that with neurodegeneration.
Yeah, I do. I have done a lot of self-studies with methylene blue, and I have I have a guy in my group with motor neurons disease who is very keen to kind of try out these protocols with me. So he's been doing a methylene blue protocol alongside the light therapy, and we're tracking his progress. And he thinks that he is getting an increased result. I'm a little bit hesitant, just because, methylene blue has been used historically as an antiparasitic and an antimicrobial. And I really, really have not been able to get to the bottom of what is the exact effect on chronic methylene blue use and the gut microbiome. I don't know, maybe somebody here, I would love to know.
Do you want to just, for the audience, just say a little bit more about methylene blue, Sarah or Michelle, sort of what it is, and why it has become such a hot topic? As I speak, this past week, methylene blue blew up again on the internet because Yes, Robert F. Kennedy, someone shot a video on their phone of him putting it in his water on Air Force One or something. So now everyone's
Isn't it
taking over the internet again.
how all this kind of taking off now with, I would never think that we would be kind of being introduced to these health topics in this way, but however it's coming through, that's great. Methylene blue actually historically is a dye. It's a dye that was used actually, in blue jeans, so it's a chemical. But the thing about methylene blue is it's an electron recycler. So it's not only an electron donator, but it actually removes excess electrons. So from the point of view of having something that would work well with red light therapy, it is a compound that people have been using because, you can supply even more electrons into the electron transport chain to enhance the effect. Or if you're kind of overproducing electrons in the form of reactive oxygen species, you can mop some of them up. So a lot of people use methylene blue. I've seen people use it in their eyes lately. People are using it in quite outrageous ways. It has been used historically in the US military. That's why people talk about, because you pee blue afterwards. So I think, it has a very strange biological effect. And actually, that's how you can titrate the dose, is by seeing how blue your pee is and kind of titrating back from that. But it was used for malaria, actually, to treat malaria, because it is anti-parasitic, because of this effect on the electrons, and it actually has an effect on the outer coats of the parasites. So this is kind of where I have tried it. I'm happy to try things on myself and see how it works. I'm not always happy about recommending it to other people unless I really for sure know that it's totally safe. And I'm not 100% convinced about it right now, because I just need a little bit more information on how it is actually interacting with the gut microbiome, because my whole thing is, that I want the body to be optimally functioning. And, if you focus just on one thing, like you focus on getting more electrons to the brain to the detriment of your gut bacteria, that doesn't sit well with me. But I'm very happy to hear anybody else's input on this, because it's something that, as you say, everybody talks about it. And if you go to any biohacking event, everyone's got a blue tongue, and now they've got blue eyes, where they're actually dropping it into the whites of their eyes.
All right.
I have used it, and I did think I got more energy for it. Do I use it every day? No, I don't. Do I recommend it to other people? No, not unless they really kind of know the risks and they want to do a little protocol in it. And I have to say that just from an N of 1 of a volunteer who's got motor neuron, he did find it helped with brain fog.
Right. Yes, no, I've heard good feedback on it. I also haven't tried it. I think people think I try all the things. I'm pretty low maintenance. I don't use that many extra products, to be honest. Julie.
Yes, hi. So my question actually is, this is kind of good to follow on the methylene blue topic, because I'm thinking about, or could you talk about the difference between a therapy for a particular disease state, such as Parkinson's, versus that deficiencies or health issues that maybe led to that? And I feel like methylene blue kind of falls into that. Like, could it be used therapeutically versus do you use it in a preventative sort of way? Because the preventative piece just seems so much more complex as far as what's leading to different disease states.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is urgency and motivation. If you find yourself already in a fairly progressed disease state, maybe you may take a more calculated risk. But I think it is just about calculating risk. With any kind of drug, with any kind of non-natural intervention, there's going to be a side effect somewhere down the line. There's always a price to pay for a pharmaceutical or for a drug. And methylene blue does sit a little bit within that category, whether it's, your detox organs, or, like I say, maybe potentially upsetting your bacteria balance. There's always some price to pay, but it's about taking a calculated risk, because if you're in a fairly progressed disease state, you might find that risk is worth it for the potential gain. I think from a prevention point of view, it's very, it's very simple. It's just really optimize your environment. Well, this is my advice. Maybe this isn't advice that anybody would take, but optimize your light environment, optimize your relationships, optimize everything. And you don't need to do anything in addition to that. I think it may be something where you would want to do something additionally once you find yourself in that state. Or whether you're like me and you're just curious and you just want to find out. But it's not something I would do long term without having the necessity to do that. So again, I think it's about risk management. I do have a predisposition for neurodegeneration. So I am kind of always trying to weigh up what is the potential risk to this particular therapy versus the potential advantage. But yes, you're right. Prevention is tricky. It's a hard sell for sure. And it's a tricky one to know what's the best thing you can do to put yourself in a better position in your later life.
All right. So, Sarah, where can people find you and where can they find the Sarah Thrive?
So people can find me. My name's Sarah, but my company's also Sarah. So I've helpfully worn this T-shirt so that people can see the different spelling. But my name's Sarah Turner, and my company's called Sarah Thrive, spelt like the brain, CERA, like cerebral, like cerebellum. So
Yeah.
I'm on almost all socials with that handle, Sarah Thrive. So you can LinkedIn, whatever it is, it's Sarah Thrive. The company is sarahthrive.com. And all socials and any kind of contact info you find goes to me. So, you're more than welcome to email me. Otherwise, it's just sarah@sarahthrive.com.
Great. And Jedediah has questions.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So, in your experience, do Parkinson's patients tend to be dehydrated? And
And then, sorry.
do they tend to be dehydrated? And do they tend to be fast oxidizers?
You're asking me if they're dehydrated and fast oxidizers. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a measure of someone's hydration status. If people are coming to me with Parkinson's, usually it's because they've been diagnosed with it. And so they're just coming with a pre-diagnosis. And most of the time, people don't know things like their status. Most people are just coming from what the doctors told them, and presumably they're just being measured based on things like tremor and maybe MRI. So I really don't know. I mean, I think obviously hydration goes very closely with the light piece that we're talking about, because if you're very healthy and your proteins are working properly in your brain, then they're going to be hydrated proteins so that they fold in the right way. Because a lot of neurodegeneration comes from misfolding of proteins, which is coming from the fact that maybe the water surrounding them isn't charged or charged effectively, that the proteins can fold in the right way. So I would think that neurodegeneration is definitely associated with some kind of water issue. But no, I wouldn't have that additional information, and I'm not sure that even the people who have been diagnosed have that information. What's your take on it?
Well, I'm speaking more personally, but yes, it seems to me that there's a lot to do with that. I know that, and this is a question, if you know anything more about it, melanin itself requires dopamine to make melanin. And since we don't create enough dopamine in the first place, that creates a problem receiving the light and creating the water.
Mm-hmm.
I also wondered about the fast oxidation piece, because when you were talking about methylene blue and the excess electrons, I know for myself and for my family line, it seems like people are fast oxidizers. In other words, they're more high strung and high metabolism, fast metabolism, as opposed to the people that, have the other metabolic problems of, putting on weight and being the low metabolizers. And I want to know if you had any experience with that, or, observed just people who you worked with.
No, I don't. And I suppose the science is only good as the data that's collected from people. Because if this data was being collected, then we would be able to do an analysis and find out, look for those trends. But I think if in all the research, the data, we're not collecting those data points, then it's very difficult to say, yeah, there does seem to be a trend for
Yes.
these kinds of things. Maybe once, the whole thing about AI is getting huge now, but maybe once we start to go back, we could retrospectively look, if any of this data was collected, then we could see trends. But I mean, your own observation, again, is data in itself. So if that's something you're observing yourself, I would suggest that could definitely be the case.
Your idea of the survey, I mean, just asking those questions, I'd love to be. I mean, the clinic that I go to for Parkinson's is not going to let me interview my fellow patients. And so I would love to create a survey just to ask the group of Parkinson's patients whether they have symptoms that would say, yes, you're dehydrated, or yes, you are fast oxidizing, things like that. Another thing I'm curious about is this whole thing of the arc that you have. Instead of, like, I have a red light panel and I just use it on my brain and my whole torso, front and back. But you're saying that because of the skull, the light doesn't come in at all angles. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm saying in order to actually get light onto the surface of the brain, you probably need to have a device that goes flush to your head rather than a device that's kind of square on.
Yes.
But you're still getting the light in through the body, you're still having the systemic effect. And certainly, if you're shining it onto the abdomen, you're still getting that gut effect where you're going to get a brain effect. It's just if you want to target the brain directly, I really think that you need to have a device that's contoured. Otherwise, the light just can't get through the skull.
Yeah. Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah. It's been so good. And I just wanted to pick up on the dehydration piece. So for our podcast audience, a little more general than the pros we have in the room right now. Could you just say a little bit? I mean, I think when most people think dehydration, we think, oh, I didn't drink enough water. Now, of course, we need to drink a decent amount of high quality water. But talk to me about cellular dehydration. And you already mentioned the effect that could have on the breed in terms of protein folding. But how does light help with hydration?
Yeah, I think it's an important topic. Yeah, it's about how the body is utilizing the water. And if we think about inside the body, we are a huge percentage of water. And some of that is in our cells and some of it is in our blood. And it makes a difference of where that water is situated. It also makes a difference of making sure that all the proteins in our bodies are surrounded by water. And we mentioned Mei Wan Ho earlier, this is one of her principles, that everything is being kind of conducted in this way via the water in our bodies, because, we have intracellular water, but we also have all of this water surrounding all of our proteins. And from the work of Jeremy Pollock, we know that you can change the structure or the order of the water when you expose a hydrophilic surface, which is basically, it means water loving, but any kind of membrane or anything inside our body. If you expose the water that's next to one of those surfaces to light, we can actually change the order or the structure of water. And this is a hugely fascinating concept, and probably, we could talk for an hour about it on its own, but it basically means that you can have different viscosities of water in different areas of the bodies and also different charges. So from a point of view, it's like protein folding. Proteins fold according to where the relative charges are on the surface structure. So if you don't have those charges, or if they're weak charges because we have dehydration or not enough room in those areas, then you can fold the proteins and you can have suboptimal functioning of the cell. Hydration is very important, but also having water in places. You're right. You could drink a gallon of water. It's not going to the right places, or your detox organs are not working properly. You're just peeing it all out. You're not getting that effect. So it's about, again, thinking holistically about it. You drink enough water, but you also need the light exposure and the good food and the good environment in order to make maximum use of that water so that you are hydrated.
Right. Coming back to what you were saying earlier about keeping the battery charged.
Right.
We need to be well hydrated, and the light and the water all work together to keep us in that healthy state. Sarah, thank you so much. Any last thoughts or anything that's coming to you that you'd like to share with our audience about anything?
No, I think we've covered everything, and it was lovely to speak to your group. I think we did good to do a podcast where we got some interaction, but I also think it's also about keeping it simple. We just need to really understand the importance of light in biology and also in our science, because it is something that I feel like we're just so far removed from it. But as soon as you start to kind of gain that concept, and even, and do little simple experiments, be outdoors, kind of be your N=1, I think it becomes more real and tangible, because sometimes the science, we can get a little bit stuck in the weeds, but it's actually very simple, good water, good light, good friends, done,
Love it. Yes. Real water, real food, real light, real people.
Yes. Yes.
Recipe for happiness and health and happiness. Sarah, appreciate seeing you. I know you're very busy traveling the world, attending all these conferences. So I'd love to do this again sometime. And thanks for being back on the QVC podcast.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QVC.